We do need to do roll call.
We're gonna do a roll call,
Like was.
okay? You ready?
Right. Chair Christine Lattice Drake.
Here.
Member James Axelson.
Here?
Member Mitchell Miskey.
Here.
Member Dawn Snell.
Here.
Member John DeLulo.
Here.
Member Jaleesa Collins has an excused absence. Member Carolina Roddy.
Present.
Vice Chair Elizabeth Lamug. Here. And alternate Carmen Hernandez. Here. Thank you, everyone.
We have a quorum. Very good. So we're gonna start with opening business. Approval of the minutes for May 13th meeting. Did everybody get their minutes? Yep. Was everybody able to look over it? Yeah. Okay. Is there anybody that wants to make a motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve.
Dawn?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, Mitchell? Anybody against? No? Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Okay, and then our next order of business is a presentation by Ayers.
Good evening, Stephanie Streeter, Senior Planner with Community Development. I'm just doing a quick introduction. So the City of St. Cloud is working with AIRS to help create our downtown historic design guidelines. We're not actually voting on it this evening. This is just for them to provide you what we've gotten so far, what the goals of the design guidelines, and to actually get your feedback that we can incorporate into the draft. So our goal is to bring this to the August City Council meeting to be voted on, so that way we can use this as a reference when we review cases. So with that, I'm going to give you over to Benoit. Thank you all.
Good evening. Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for having us here. My name is Binoy Paniker, and I've been before this council, before this board before, last year. And my colleague here is Jay. So we have been tasked by the city and Stephanie and team to prepare the downtown district design guidelines. So we're here to do that. So it's going to be an interactive session. It's a huge topic, and we have a lot of design guidelines to cover. But what we thought, for the purposes of this workshop, to give you an overview of how we want to structure it, and what are the key factors in each of these different areas. We'll go over it, and so you can see how it all fits into place, and provide us some feedback at a high level. And just following up on, so we'll go over the project context, what's led us to this point of preparing design guidelines for the downtown, some of the overview of the outcomes and the purpose of what we're trying to achieve, and the process in which we've done this. We've had some community engagement. We'll share some of the feedback and results of that. We'll give you a big picture of how the design guidelines are structured, specifically for historic buildings, for work that's related to historic buildings, new buildings, and the approval process as well. So it's categorized into separate sections. We'll go over that in a little bit. And it goes a little beyond just understanding. Christine's presentation was really fantastic, and we could relate to a lot of those topics. It goes beyond documentation, but really how we can put all this together, make sure that the intent of new construction and the existing buildings are preserved to some extent. So that's what we're trying to do. So understanding the economics of the city and the goals of promoting growth and development in a managed and cohesive way. So it balances quite a bit of things. And then how this is going to be applicable, how we see this is going to be implemented by the city, which you will be a big part of, and how we're going to structure all of that. And then we'll take questions as well. But feel free to interrupt us as we speak, and we can progress with this. So just for some context, when we came back last year, we actually prepared the historic preservation plan. So considering where the city has been in the last year or so, year and a half, it's phenomenal that if we think that we didn't have much except a bare bones ordinance, related to historic preservation, to where we are now with all the education sessions that you're having, and with the work that's been covered previously with the historic preservation plan, which is a comprehensive document that covers all the programs and the projects that ideally would take St. Cloud to a better place related to historic preservation. So in the historic preservation, this was kind of the final graphic or the final picture of what we want to achieve over the next, say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years through the historic preservation plan. So we had closely aligned with the Main Street program of St. Cloud, and we came up with this 4-point approach, which I'm pretty sure you're familiar with, which talks about economic development, design, program administration, and promotion. So we aligned the historic preservation agenda in the plan to that, and one of the key things was preparing a design guidelines to support or to implement the plan. So it's commendable that the city has moved ahead with that, and here we are, in less than 6 months or 8 months, talking about design guidelines. So I think it's really commendable on the city side, on the staff side, to move this so quickly, so forward. And just when you think that we had a historic downtown, there was nothing to guide that, and now we're having something so quickly. Education is a key component, but this is just one component of all the other things that different people are doing, public, private, and everything. But that's the context for this project. So the purpose of the design guidelines is really to provide guidance to property owners for property modifications or new construction. So that's very clear and simple, because from where we sit and having prepared plans and reviewed plans, a lot of times it's just not the intention to do good, but just not knowing what to do. So I think this meaning that a lot of times if you have a conversation with applicants and developers about certain design elements, they're like, well, we didn't know. We would have been happy to do it. So I think this design guidelines would really help further that in promoting that awareness and providing guidance more than being regulatory, if you see the difference. So regulation and, that's one thing, but it's just providing information, providing a better way of doing it. The design guidelines, the second purpose is really to provide a framework, a point of reference for staff and for you to look at projects and make a little more, instead of a subjective, a little more objective kind of decision-making process. Okay, when we're talking about new construction, does it, get the essence of what we're trying to do with the design guidelines, so that you will have a better judgment of things. So that's really the two purposes. One is to provide the applicant some advice, and the second is to provide staff and us reviewing the plans some guidance. So for the project itself, the targeted outcomes was to really involve with stakeholders and the community at large. Considering the time frame, we did have a very successful meeting. We have a few slides on that with the community. We tried something different, we'll share that. And to prepare the guidelines based on that conversation, because we had just come off the back of the historic preservation plan, we had quite some context onto the pulse of historic preservation in the city. So we were able to capitalize on that and prepare these guidelines. We also want, as an outcome, to make implementable guidelines. So I think we have to understand, it's preservation, but it's also, it needs to be implementable. So how do we give enough space for economic development, but yet preserve the character of our city? So that's the prism, or that's the lens we looked at. And then establish strategies that implement the guidelines. So we, beyond just having it as a guidebook, we don't want it to become too onerous that people just disregard it and flaunt. Just it's of no value. So that's the frame of mind that we did this, and it's a step. It's a step-by-step process with design guidelines and historic preservation. So this is very important. The process itself, so we were tasked to complete this study and process in about 18 weeks, realistically about 18 to 20 weeks. The scope itself was divided into 7 tasks, including study of some of the things that you saw in the previous slide presentation, a study of the existing architecture, study of other best practices in the state, and in other places as well. We looked at St. Augustine, Mount Dora, Sanford, some of the other communities to see what's worked, what's not worked. We have some experience as well preparing some of the guidelines. We had stakeholder meetings with 3 or more individuals just to, who have the pulse of that. historic preservation and design guidelines to get, feedback on what if we do this and what if we don't do this? How would it be best received? So we had that. We had a big public meeting. So we tried something new. Some of the pictures that you see on that is we thought, traditionally public meetings in St. Cloud, we have it in City Hall or in some other facility, and there's arguable representation by the community in this. So we said, collectively, we kind of brainstormed, so how can we maximize this? So we took it out to the community. So that's the monthly market in March. We had over 100 people just walk by. So that's interesting on two counts. One is the number, and the second is we get people that normally don't come to public meetings. We have a little saying in our profession, like those who come to public meetings are generally people who have, a certain interest. We don't get a wide cross-section of people. So this was fantastic in that because we just grabbed people that most of them lived in and around the city, a few people outside, but just business owners, people just come out to enjoy the evening, and they all had a say. It's fairly interactive. We promoted this. I think the city pushed this quite a bit on their social media, and then we had little flyers posted as well. But overall, I think it was a successful experiment. Over 100 people showed up at that venue, and we engaged with them, to their liking. It was like you don't have to sit through the whole thing. It was like an open house kind of session. We'll walk with you. We'll explain how we were doing. So we'll have two public meetings. One is this one, and the other one is with the City Commission or City Council. So just one slide on the community feedback. So we made it interactive as much as possible. So we had a few boards. We had a survey that went along with this, which was open for quite a number of weeks. I think 2 weeks and 3 weekends. So the boards were like, what do you like? Simple questions, but a lot to be deciphered from those questions. Which style do you like? You heard about the styles from Christine's presentation before. Just to get the pulse of it, what's most appropriate for downtown? We showed a few pictures, what are the, there's variants of all of these styles, but frame vernacular, masonry vernacular, colonial revival. And you can see that for downtown, there was quite a number of preferences. So the green dots actually show, what you want or what you like, and the red dots are what you didn't like. So you can see that. That's the architectural style. But we'll talk about the style. It's important, but it's important, very important here. But we want to find a way, especially for new construction, to do design without saying you have to do that style. So that's where we're going with this.
What's the yellow and the blue dots?
The yellow and the blue, Jay. Yeah.
Either
Can
come
you
to
come
the
up?
microphone, please.
Sorry. Thank you.
Hi. Yes, the yellow dots, we had some participants that were a little bit on the fence. They weren't sure if they liked it, if they didn't like it, so the yellow was more neutral.
Okay.
And the blue dots is in replacement of the green dots. We ran out of green dots. So, to be very candid.
Awesome. So blue and green means go.
Yes, red is no, yellow
yellow
is, I could take it or leave it.
Okay, good to know. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I knew you would say that better than me. So then we had the same thing about streets and public spaces. So as much as historic preservation is about buildings, when we look at places, it's about the overall experience. It's about the urban design. So what's your feeling about the street? It's the experience. So we thought this is important. And normally you wouldn't find, there's a few design guidelines that cover that aspect, but we thought it's important for St. Cloud to cover that. So we have it featured in our guidelines. So we thought we'd rather ask that question on what kind of street character do you prefer. It was all over the place. So in terms of ornamental landscaping, whether you like native, palm trees and things like that. Then native landscaping, obviously, the word kind of led to that. People wanted shade and canopies along the street, which is a very valid, it's a utilitarian thing, but it also has implications on how we design the streets. Rustic and street types of street furnishings, so the last two is about that. We're kind of branching off into a little bit of, it's historic, but can we have a little fun with some rustic kind of treatment in terms of our street furnishings, which there are a few, or you want a more traditional, like Victorian style lighting, and which is what you have. So all of this, and then we left a lot of open discussions as well, so which we captured all of this. We analyzed it, and we've submitted it as well to the city to kind of look at the reference point. So the one thing that came out very clear is there's an overall sentiment of all the 100 people that walked through and of the 50 responses, there's a strong sentiment that it's important to be preserved. The historic character is important enough for us to take action. So going into this, we were thinking, is that going to be a double-loaded question, or is that going to be a question, what if everybody says no? But we said, no, we should ask that question. And so the answer is, there is a sentiment that this is important, this is a defining element or a feature for downtown, and especially when you kind of put references to it, like say, Mount Dora has it, Sanford has it, and Sanford 20 years ago was, nothing was there, but now when you look at it,
It's beautiful.
it's beautiful. They had the bare bones, the structure was there, but you see how it's evolved, and when you put that in reference, and I think people do appreciate that there is scope and opportunity for St. Cloud to have that as well. So that's a summary, but there's a lot. There's a whole detailed summary that goes with this, but in the interest of time, we'll just cover that. So the design guidelines, I'll let Jay speak to the details, but I just want to explain how we've structured it very simply for you to understand, just the overall structure. So there's going to be, it's structured into like 4 or 5 chapters. The introduction and the context is the first chapter of the design guidelines. We want it to be, we have a rough draft, which we're going to discuss with Stephanie and team pretty soon. It's going to be more illustrative, more guidance oriented, and it's going to be about 50 to 60 pages, let's say plus minus, so people can quickly go through it, understand it in terms of, if this is if it pertains to new construction, this is the section I need to look at. If it's existing buildings, this is what I need to look at. Streets and public spaces mainly is applicable to the city itself, because the city controls the streets. And so when Public Works sees this, oh, this is the overall intent. Okay, let's make sure that the plantings are like that, your curb cuts are like that, we respect the grid, the grid pattern in the streets, all of those features. So, and then any other public projects that kind of go across streets, because you'll see soon maybe some P3 projects and other things. So how do we relate those bigger infrastructure projects? So we thought that was important. So introduction and context, kind of setting the tone, the history, some of what Christine covered, setting the background for it, the story. And then we get into guidelines for streets and public spaces that set the context for the building. Guidelines for existing buildings, so all buildings that have these characters, classified into certain elements that Christine, so we cover all of that. It's more, less academic, but more practical in a way that, say, awnings, you got to do that, or this would help you get that. The roof line, what's important to preserve in your, say, in your colonial revival, the roof materials. We talk about colors, which is one big thing that, in a classic preservation standpoint, we kind of overlook that. The number of colors on a building, that's so important. 3, we usually don't have more than, what are the colors that you don't want to have? So the materials, I think that's also key. So for the existing buildings, we cover that in several topics. Jay will go over that. For the new buildings, it becomes even more important because we want to give them the flexibility to design as they so choose. And it's an evolution. When you saw the time periods that these characters, the historic character, it started from 1800s all the way down to present. So we want buildings that represent this time as well. In 50 years, these buildings, these new buildings will become historic. So, but we want those new buildings to respect the context of what it is, and not have a totally obnoxious building that's not in sync with this. It's a lot of theory, but I think we've done this in other places. So what we do in that I'll just tell you in a nutshell before Jay covers it, is to decode the existing buildings and say, for example, the ratio of windows to the openings to the facade should be 20 to 30%. So if you look at that, so we'll say a historic character of St. Cloud is the ratio of openings to facade, solid to void, is 20 to 30%. So that will give you, that'll establish some context as opposed to having 90% open, which is totally out of character with St. Cloud. You see what I'm saying? So we're not telling them you got to design a Victorian building, you got to design a craftsman building. Well, we'll decode the main elements. Your roof is going to be like this. Your parapets are going to be defined by these structures. You can design it how you want. Your height's going to be this. You know, certain stipulations that will give you the end result of a historic building. Well, that's not a historic building, but that's something that's consistent with a historic building. So that's what we're doing. So those are the 4 chapters, and then the 5th chapter really will be the implementation. Who's going to approve it? And that's something we have to actually figure out a little more. I know the city has revised the whole process with major and minor applications, so we'll try and keep that in line with that. And yeah, so that's where we are. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, my colleague. She's going to talk about a little more detail on each of those 4 different sections.
Good evening, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Jay. I've had a lot of fun working on this project because, as Christine mentioned, you stare at a lot of the buildings for so long that it starts to become a bit of a game. It's like, I think I know what that is. I think I can kind of figure out, and I've picked out a couple of houses out here that I have my eye on that I want to snatch up if I can. So as you know, the Secretary of the Interior Standards is the foundation when it comes to a lot of preservation projects. And so not to dismiss that, we want to reinforce that in the guidelines as well as provide some level of education, because we also acknowledge that there are people out there who have a love for preservation, but perhaps may not have an understanding. And so there's like that little bit of a gap of like, okay, well, I like this, I want to keep this, I want to retain it, maintain it, and preserve it. How do I do that? And so the whole tone of the guidelines itself is a balance of plain language as well as urban planning and preservation terminology where applicable. We want to make sure that when it's being utilized for property owners, developers, as well as city staff, and your guidance as well, that there's no room for misinterpretation, that the message comes clear without getting muddled in the terminology. And that was actually reiterated by some of the stakeholders that we met with in terms of like bringing home the need for that education for the public, and also having that cross-collaboration between the Preservation Board, community development staff, as well as the building department. So that part is in the introduction, is immediately when you start going through the overview of the Historic Preservation Overlay District, as well as talking about, you know, the city's preservation efforts in terms of establishing the ordinance and the purpose behind the ordinance, and then immediately following into the Secretary of the Interior Standards. Hopefully I remember how to use this. Perfect. So as Benoit mentioned, so the guidelines for streets and public spaces is sort of a catch-all. It's talking about existing as well as potential new construction as well. You know, we want to support economic development efforts. We don't want to hinder growth within the city, but we also want to maintain some level of flexibility where applicable. And the city has, as you know, invested a lot of money into their streetscape efforts and their furnishings. And as beautiful as it looks, we want to maintain and preserve that. And we also want to make sure that anything that's incoming adheres to that, not in a mandatory fashion, but more as respecting the historic character of the downtown. So language would be, you know, in terms of respecting like the site development patterns within the downtown commercial core. From what I've looked at in my research, the development pattern is, you know, you have the 0 lot lines with some of the structures sort of centrally placed. And what it appears that there may perhaps be some perimeter block development, which is like characteristic feature of like early European development patterns. And you'll notice that in a lot of your commercial buildings as well, where you see the facades are more than just one elevation. It's multi, sometimes two elevations, if three, where you have like that corner commercial where it's like a prominent node, which tells me that at some point that intersection clearly was a prominent gathering space for many of the early, settlers. Something fun clearly was happening on that corner where everyone had to find themselves. And so we want to maintain that with a lot of the new construction as well, because that's a prominent characteristic that St. Cloud has. It's not on every single corner, which is also, as Christine mentioned, I would say, in my opinion, a prominent architectural feature. Why isn't that on every corner? Clearly something important was happening where it's seen on specific corners. So we want to maintain that, as well as the design and materials, as Benoit mentioned, the visual preference survey. It was an interesting mixture of kind of having like that, I don't like old, and then, well, I like old. And so it's trying to find that balance of like, okay, well, can we allow for some modernity in the what we currently have in the more older street furnishings, while again, respecting that historic character as well. When it comes to utilities and outdoor mechanical, I don't know about you guys. I don't like looking at it. I want it to be hidden. I don't want to know about it. And so we stipulate that in the guidelines as well, is that, yeah, you can have that. We're not saying you can't, but it should be obscured. So for example, as you've seen some of the roof lines in your downtown commercial core, you have like your parapets that is, the continuous surface, and you have like your false parapets, which are like very reminiscent of like Midwestern old Western towns, if you have that general idea. And so we stipulate that the parapet should be like no taller than about 30 inches per OSHA standards, just for safety guidelines, to hide those mechanical utilities. And it should be set back from the roof line so that it's not visible from the street as well. Because again, you don't want to obstruct the block face of your downtown core. You want to maintain that. And an ugly machinery is going to detract from that. And, we don't want to do that. In terms of parking in open lots, you have that P3 project coming as well. And so you want to make sure, again, that when it comes to any new construction, it maintains that historic character. And there are a lot of examples in a lot of different towns and cities within our state and outside of our state as well, as you'll see for Winter Garden, that has that parking structure, but it still maintains that pedestrian level. It's not just like a wall of concrete. There's like some, as Benoit mentioned, that solid to void ratio. And it can even be, constructed in a way where perhaps maybe the first floor is some sort of like mixed use commercial retail, if you so choose. But again, we want to allow for some of that flexibility. And so this is primarily focused on preserving what you have, retaining what you have, and then again, allowing for some creative expression where applicable, not to get completely too out of the box with things. So then we go into existing buildings. I actually had a really fun time looking at the existing buildings. This one is very interesting because, to your question previously when Christine was presenting, our methodology for constructing the guidelines was a combination of examining your existing conditions and then also doing research on the architectural styles using the 2020 Historic Downtown District Survey. And then also looking at a lot of older photographs from the State Archive repository, and then cross-referencing that with the county property appraiser, just to get like an understanding of, well, you have this structure. I think I might have an idea of perhaps when it may be constructed based on some features, but then on the property appraiser's website, it'll tell you what additions have been added over the years. So for example, my struggle was the awnings and the canopies. And it's very interesting, you guys have a lot of awnings. I found out that we've come to a point now, that 50-year plus mark, where canopies and awnings are now to be preserved. And their original history dates further back to pre-1920s, where they were very whimsical in nature. They're a very character-defining feature. They gave the facade a personality, if you will. And if you've ever seen any older images of the St. Cloud Hotel, which I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole just staring at the facade of the awnings, because they're just so pretty to look at, you realize like, oh, that's not something that needs to be torn off, like that needs to be saved, because there's a purpose for it, there's a significance. It dates back to, pre mechanical air conditioning, when the settlers were doing their best trying to trudge along this Florida climate without any AC. And you have those awnings and those canopies that created that breezeway naturally, as well as the Hunter Arms Hotel. It has that arcade that extends into the sidewalk, creating that natural breezeway. Well, that was needed in order to,
Cool off.
exactly, go about your days and not pass out from heat stroke. So not only did it have a functional purpose, but now we've come to the point where it has it has more of an aesthetic purpose, and it's something worth being saved. And because you guys have so many awnings of so many different styles and different features with the horizontal and the vertical lines and the barrel, that's something that needs to be saved. Christine made a really good point when it came to the windows. You have like a lot of 2/2s and 1/1s. Not a lot of original windows, but that's not to be said that the 2/2s and the 1/1s shouldn't be saved, because at some point we will reach a point in history that again will be of historic significance. And one thing that we learned throughout this process is that when it comes to alterations and additions, it's not something that should be, or rather the mindset shouldn't be, well, why did you change that? That was so beautiful. It's more, well, that's an opportunity to track the evolutionary process of that structure, where it started, where it is now, and where it's going to go into the future. And I think it's really interesting because you at least how I think of it, the buildings are sort of like a time capsule. You start with like a craftsman. There's one structure in particular that I, again, found that a bit of a rabbit hole with the front facade, and how it was also a masonry craftsman. And the property owners in 2007, per the property appraiser's website, removed the front porch and they blocked it off. And you look at the facade and you're like, something's a little off. And then looking at the pictures on the property appraiser's website, looking at the pictures on the property appraiser's website, the new property owners have come and now restored that porch back to its original integrity. And you look at it and you're like, okay, I see something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I see what it was now. Because at first you think, well, it has those features of a craftsman, but I'm not sure. But the porch is missing, and they had a side entrance that wasn't
porches here.
Yes,
Yeah.
that wasn't
Enclosed.
prominent on that street face.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
once you've
really.
reintroduced that, you bring back that architectural integrity that, okay, I know what that is. That is important to our history. This one here, 1008 Florida Avenue, was a very interesting structure in terms of character-defining features. And I just want to kind of build off of what Christine said, that I think it also involves materials as well. And that can be backed up with the preservation briefs that we've cited as well from the National Park Service when looking at character-defining features. It's not only just the tangible things, but it's also the how is the stucco applied? Certain hand tooling creates like this really interesting texture that you have replicated in a lot of your structures downtown. That's also worth preserving, not to be covered up with, or sandblasted or improperly maintained. This structure was a single-family home that was converted into a residence, but what caught me was that parapet that's not seen on residences usually, and then you can't see it in this image, but there is an H medallion pressed into the top step of that parapet. That's not replicated in your core. That's something that's usually seen on commercial structures. And so that tells me that at some point in this building's evolutionary process, whoever the original property owner is versus to whomever altered it, needed a commercial space and they wanted to replicate what was downtown, just it wasn't in close proximity to the main downtown core, which is okay. It's just very interesting, and that's something that's worth preserving. The canopy that you see on that corner structure, again, notice that very prominent corner facade that really meets you when you're coming at that intersection. Clearly there was a lot of fun times happening at that corner. That's something also worth preserving, that canopy structure where it's sort of like a shed roof that slopes down. Again, creating that breezeway, because again, we didn't have the modern mechanical systems that we have today. And so, they were trying their best with the heat that we have. This pink Pepto-Bismol colored building is also my favorite. The reason being is because you have like all these intricate details, again, worth preserving. You can't see it in the picture, but if you were to go to this property on Florida Avenue, you'll notice it's brick. However, it's not your normal brick. The sizing of the brick varies between very slim and narrow to very thick and short. that tells me that whomever constructed that structure clearly had a fun time. They personalized it, building it, because they put their own personal touch in it. And if you go to any other masonry building in your core, whether in Florida or outside the main downtown, you won't see that replicated. At least I haven't seen that replicated. I wear glasses for a
Years
reason.
ago, they used like a brick block.
Exactly, exactly. So a lot of CMU blocks, a lot of stucco, definitely sand brick that was mentioned in the 2020 Downtown Historic Survey as well, which is also a very interesting prominent feature because that tells me that after the 1886 Chicago fire, a lot of municipalities started to mandate the use of masonry because cities were burning down. And if you've been here long enough and if you've been to DeLand, they had a similar situation a little bit after the 1886 Chicago fire with the city of DeLand. Specifically, it was recorded that they mandated all construction be masonry. And so that you can track through their evolutionary process, like, oh, that's interesting. This is that wood frame. Perhaps maybe it has like a brick facade, but there's some wood features on it. So, did the brick come first? Did the wood come first? Which one is it? Regardless, it needs to be saved because it's a part of your evolutionary process in the eclectic architectural style that you guys have. And please tell me if I'm talking too fast, I apologize. So when it comes to new buildings, one thing that was reiterated and that was also reflected in the survey is that we want to preserve, but we need to maintain a level of flexibility. We also understand that it's a case-by-case, situation, whether, there are costs that are preventing you from perhaps preserving, maintaining, repairing. If you have like economic hardships, we understand that the guidelines should not be so strict in that they miss an opportunity for appropriate preservation that's documented in your history. So we want to work with property owners and developers and make sure that, again, you have that level of flexibility where applicable, and that maintains the historic character of your district. It maintains the block face. We want to make sure that when it comes to like any setbacks, perhaps you don't want to follow that zero lot line. Okay, well, maybe we have a 0 to 10 foot setback. The reason for that being is it allows more open public spaces in your downtown. You do have some public spaces, but there's, a chance to add more. Maybe there's like a little plaza that would kind of act as that corner node for like a gathering space. Perhaps maybe more opportunities for landscaping and vegetation. That was something that was definitely reiterated at our public engagement. We want more shading in the downtown, and we want more vegetation, we want more native plants that replicate that historic feel that we have downtown, and that's great. We want to make sure that's translated into the new buildings as well. And so you'll see here I have some examples of some other facades in different cities within the general Central Florida that have replicated that. And I need to reinforce this, the goal with the new buildings is not to mimic, it's to allow for that freedom of expression, but that adheres to that compliance within the historic character. The image for Claremont, though there, you don't see like your transforms, your bulkheads, your recessed storefront displays, which you have a lot in your downtown core, they do have that prominent canopy. Though it's not front-facing on the front elevation, it's on the side, that's quite all right. It still provides that level of shade, but then it also respects the integrity of the canopies you currently do have. And also it has like those posts that's supporting it that, again, replicated within your core. You have the image from Lakeland in terms of the color and paint palette, which you'll see a lot in a lot of older historic homes. It follows that 3 color palette scheme where you have the main body, you have the major trim, and then you have the minor trim. So you'll have like a main body, maybe like an olive green, and then perhaps the trim is like a nice cream or a beige, and then you have the minor trim, which is like the windows, the sash, and then you have like the eaves. It's something different. You want to highlight each feature because they work with each other. One feature is not more important than the other, and they all need to be highlighted together, if that makes sense. And then you have the image from Winter Garden, which shows you in terms of architectural character. So it has some of those architectural features in terms of like respecting that vertical rhythm of the windows that kind of wraps around all 3 facades. Also, it has like that corner situation where it meets you when you come up to the building rather than just kind of blocks you off. It has like those 3 vertical rhythms up that cylindrical portion, I believe is what it is. And it also has like that main little prominent entrance you see on the other facade, where it greets you for the entrance. So you have like, various entrances, which again is replicated in your core with your 1 blocks and your 2 blocks. And whether or not you have that upstairs residence office and you have that side entrance on the side elevation, or if it's right next to the main prominent entrance on the front facade, that's something to be maintained, because that says, hey, look, at one point, this was a very active, thriving corridor when it was, pre or post-settlement rather. There were businesses here, there were residents up there, there was a sense of community. You want to not replicate, you want to keep that, and then also make sure that the incoming infill and new construction replicate that as well. The last thing, obviously, we want is any new introduction to hinder growth, as well as the economic development activity happening in your downtown core as well. This image of Tampa, which is actually very interesting, is a very interesting facade. It does not exactly mimic the surrounding brick facades, but what is very interesting is that they still keep with that rhythm. They have like those balconies that extend or project forward outwards, that still maintains that pedestrian zone and provides that needed coverage from the elements as well. And then you have the balconies, which again is prominent, mostly on the folk Victorian, you'll see on like Florida, and as well as that prominent structure on, I think it's Massachusetts, possibly Wisconsin, the pretty blue Victorian, folk Victorian house that has like that second balcony. It's not completely prominent in a lot of your residences, but your residences in the HPO district, they do reflect that. Whether altered or not, you want to maintain that. As well as Winter Garden. These 3 are actually new infills on a vacant lot that I believe had suffered a fire or arson or something of that nature, but they don't exactly replicate the architectural integrity of all of the areas in this part of Winter Garden. It caught me off guard because the backside looked original. I was like, wait, what is that? Until you look at the canopy. And so whoever the developer is with this, they had fun with the canopy. They maintained or matched the materials as best as they could, but when it comes to the signage, right? On a lot of the historic buildings, you either have like the signage on like the drop part of the awning, or it's painted on the building. They have it on the awning, but they had fun with the typeface. They did like a cute little cursive thing that's, it's nice, it's inviting. And again, we want to allow for that level of flexibility as well. And then again, maintain that solid to void ratio. Any commercial, should match the storefront and display that you have. You have like that flush storefront versus that shallow recess, which is very like reminiscent of 19th century storefront display where things were a little bit less bold and more subdued. So you want to maintain that. And so when it comes to the applicability of the review, as Bonoy mentioned, we know the community development staff has been doing their due diligence on trying to make the process more easier for property owners and developers as well, and that was something that was definitely replicated to us when we had our stakeholder meetings in terms of, property owners want to do this, but they're afraid of this. Or perhaps maybe we've heard this, and so that's why we can't do that. Well, we want to streamline that process. We want to make sure that everyone is cross-collaborating, community development staff, building department, as well as the HPP board as well, so that you all are on the same page, you know what's going on, and you can better assist property owners, developers, and so forth to, again, maintain that historic integrity of your downtown. Questions?
You did
You
great,
sure?
thank
Think
you.
you did good?
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so we'll take questions, but just we quickly went through the 4 sections, but what I just wanted to reiterate what Jay was saying. What we kind of shared with you are the objectives of each section. So, for example, in the new building section, we'll have guidelines for site design, guidelines for architectural character without prescribing a style. We'll have, say, 3 or 4, guidance topics for how we would construct a facade, meaning the combinations of facades. Doors and windows, we talked about briefly, like, what is the amount of doors, proportion of doors, and the types of windows or the style of it. There will be a position or a statement of the intent needed for canopies and awnings. Roofs and parapets, we will require that, it follows a certain dimension, a pitch, so that without telling them, you got to build a colonial roof. So that's what we'll do. Porches and balconies, materials we talked about. The City Hall is a classic example. When you look at it, it doesn't kind of comply to any of the historic design or historic character, but yet it's arguable. You can say that it kind of blends with downtown. There isn't much brick in your history, but still, it's there. So that's the flexibility we want to provide. We want to also focus on the color and color palette as well. To kind of control this in terms of what's the base color, what's your trim colors, the number of colors, for example. We're also thinking about colors. Single color buildings, it's still up for discussion, whether a totally black building, for example, is appropriate, is that, or a totally neon color building, You see, you get into a lot of discussions on that. So, but we want to not have that, and we'll do that. Signage design as well, we'll provide some guidance on how this specifically is for new buildings. So what's the amount of signage that you allow? Maybe the types of signs that you will allow. No neon or flashing signs, you don't see that here. It's more medallions and more engravings and things like that. So we want to provide guidance. So likewise for the existing buildings, so there's a whole section on the character of the existing character, and how we can preserve the existing buildings. Granted that a lot of your existing buildings within the district are residential properties, we want to kind of incorporate or accommodate that with the setbacks. Jay mentioned the bigger setbacks, the facade materials. So we'll have some guidance on how you preserve that in your existing buildings. So that's in a nutshell what we have. But each of these sections will provide more clarity, provide more guidance. With that, Stephanie, any questions for us or guidance?
I have a question.
Yes,
I don't know who would be able to answer this, but I'm curious how that's going to tie in with the, because this is guidelines versus our ordinances. So like you said, paint colors. We really don't have an ordinances so even though we can guide them to not do neon colors, I'm wondering what's our ability to be like, hey, no, you cannot paint your place neon orange.
Yes. So
Hello again, Stephanie Streeter. So our goal is we're going to adopt these guidelines as a resolution, and then we will do an ordinance update because there are other processes that we want to update, again, to streamline and do things. And in that ordinance update, we will include references to the guidelines. That basically gives us the authority to refer back to these guidelines, to use that as a basis without actually putting it in depth in our code and making our code much longer. We want to make it more user-friendly. So it will be a reference to the guidelines within the code, but then we can go to that and use that as support.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? No? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
thank you.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, we have individual board comments. Anybody? Carolina, is this your last meeting with us?
Yes. Yeah.
And James.
It's my last meeting also.
You're leaving us too? Wow.
Yeah.
We behaved. I thought you'd stay. I thought you'd stay.
I'm grateful all of this was covered though today. Like it's nice to see a culmination of a big stage. Yeah.
Well, I wish you luck.
Thank you.
We're sorry you're leaving as well.
I have one thing. It's a little, it doesn't have to do with us necessarily, so I don't know if I'm allowed, but I'm the executive director for Osceola History, and we are getting applications for our board of directors, so if anyone's interested, please let me know.
She's recruited.
Yep,
Dawn's like, sign up.
please.
Anybody else? Any comments? Welcome back.
Thank you. Yep, I will just say real fast, it's nice to be back. Just to clarify, because I know I saw a couple of the board meetings and there was definitely confusion of what happened. So just so everybody knows, because I did not realize when your term is up, even though I knew you reapplied when your term came up, but apparently you still have to be re-elected. It doesn't mean that you are just carried over. So, just so anybody knows, you may not be back in, especially on the other thing I didn't realize is how they vote us in is the city council, so say I was C4, the city council member that nominates you is just council number 4. So if they look and they don't know your name or anything, they're probably not gonna, nominate you. And I'm guessing that's probably what happened somewhere in there. But yes, it's nice to be back. I didn't make it because they told me about 2 days before the last meeting, so sorry I couldn't make the last meeting, but I already had things going on, but thank you, nice to be back.
Thanks for the heads up. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
So to add a little bit to that, one of the things that they suggest is attend the city council meeting or speak to your council members or send them an email, send them a text, and let them know, this is who I am, this is why I'm interested in joining. I mean, put a little face with the name.
Or staying.
Right, right. And I know unfortunately you had this position prior to, and I'm sorry, I just,
Oh, that's fine.
we're glad to have you back.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you on board.
Okay.
We're sorry you guys are leaving. So-
Just one final comment. So I'm assuming since you are an alternate, you would be willing to serve on one of the soon-to-be vacant positions?
Yeah, that would be fun, yeah.
All right.
So that would be a move up, and then we'd get another.
Well, we'll
alternate.
communicate that through the city clerk to the council when because they'll have to do appointments to
Yeah.
serve it, and those, that, of course, would require two new people being appointed as alternates too. So, well, it'll be sort of a musical chairs.
Yeah.
But
We've
we'll
had a
get
lot
it
of that
figured
since January, unfortunately, so, and I don't know if you guys know that the reason our original, I guess, when we voted in the chair, and then she had surgery and she left.
Yeah.
And so it kind of abruptly, boom, 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 it's been quite a change since January.
No, You're
So,
doing fine.
Yeah, we're doing good.
No, you're doing fine in the
Thank
chair.
you, thank you so much. So, anything else? I'd like to thank you guys for your time, so, thank you all, so, meeting adjourned?
Yep.